You're making me nervous, but yes, I'm ready.
Are you feeling that you are working in the country that is at war?
Not my thing. I hope that makes some kind of sense to you. Sorry about that. But I'm, so that's my personal view.
This is the best answer I could ever hope for.
And it was just great.
We've talked a lot about Eastern Ukraine and the situation in the Donbass. What about Crimea? Is there a room for Crimean issues in the Swedish-Ukrainian dialogue?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it is absolutely fundamental to keep in mind that Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine manifests itself not only in Donbass but also through the continuing occupation of Crimea. Sweden strongly supports Ukraine's initiative to establish a Crimean platform. We strongly support the efforts of Ukraine to use all available tools of diplomacy, of international law, to keep Crimea high on the international agenda. The Russian occupation of Crimea is first and foremost a gross, unacceptable violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity, and thereby it is a fundamental violation of the European security order. But the ongoing occupation of Crimea is also a security threat. It is a huge military presence of the Russian Federation in the middle of the Black Sea, which negatively impacts on the security of this part of Europe. Number three, the ongoing occupation of Crimea is a gross human rights violation, which the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission has reported on over and over again. So the ongoing Russian occupation of Crimea is it's an international law issue, it's a human rights issue, and it's a security issue, and it's definitely very high up on the agenda of Swedish relations with Ukraine.
I would like to quote Swedish Foreign Minister, who said that this support of Sweden will persist as long as Ukraine goes on with the reforms. Which milestones do you check that Ukraine is going on the path of reforms in the right direction and with the right pace?
We don't have a report card. We don't have a sort of a list of achievements that need to be checked.
But you support reforms, including support financially.
Yes. No, absolutely we do. We absolutely do. But the point I was trying to make was, I think, rather that the important thing for us is the continued commitment to reforms and the continued direction of reforms. And there, I'd like to mention a few things that I think have been extremely important. One is decentralization. It's a difficult reform, it's sometimes a messy reform, it's a reform which, like so much else, has been disturbed by the COVID pandemic. But despite all of this, it is one of the most important and one of the most successful reforms that Ukraine has undertaken. Sweden believes that decentralization reform and local self-government, which we prefer the term local self-government because that's what it's really about. It's about the idea that citizens should have an effect and impact on the political decisions which affect them on the local level. That's what this is primarily about. So I think that's one hugely successful Ukrainian reform, which is still ongoing. Another reform achievement which Sweden strongly supports and continues to support is the establishment of public broadcasting, of media reform in Ukraine. We all know that the media landscape in Ukraine is absolutely free, but we're not so sure if we can say that it's fair, in the sense that the media landscape in Ukraine is dominated by a small number of commercial players. And Sweden believes that it's extremely important that Ukraine does have a credible, functioning public broadcaster, which is neither state television nor is it private television. It's independent television and radio, which builds firmly on principles of impartial newsmaking and media. So that's another very important reform for Sweden to support. And the third and final issue that I'd like to mention in terms of successes of the Ukrainian reform policy is the hugely important reforms in the financial sector, which took place following the collapse of Privatbank. The work that has been done by successive governors of the National Bank of Ukraine, by finance ministers, by a lot of very dedicated Ukrainian public officials, have been hugely important for the economic and financial stability of Ukraine. 2020 was a very difficult economic year for all countries in the world, including Ukraine. But I do believe that if it had not been for the reforms which began back in 2015, 2016, then Ukraine would have been in much worse shape as a result of the COVID pandemic than it is today. So I think those are three of the really hugely important reforms that Ukraine has made in recent years and that Sweden supports.
We totally agree with you. However, the pace of these reforms implementation today is not satisfying for the Ukrainian people at all. Do you somehow attribute this pace to the ongoing conflict in the East, or is it just a matter of political will of the government?
Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know, but I will say this. Carrying out fundamental reforms, I think, is a huge challenge anywhere, in any country. I think a country like Sweden, which has enjoyed stable political institutions for hundreds of years, needs to approach and evaluate the challenges that Ukraine faces with a big dose of humility. It's not easy for a country which gained its independence 30 years ago and which is in an extremely challenging security environment to success fast and successfully. And unlike Ukraine's neighbor Poland, Ukraine does not have the benefits of being a member neither of the European Union nor of NATO. So I think this is an important starting point when we evaluate these reforms. Second point I'd like to make, exactly as you say, the challenges that I'm talking about, I imagine, are compounded so much if you consider that Ukraine is trying to carry out these reforms at a situation when it is the victim of aggression, military and other types of aggression by the Russian Federation. It's pretty, I wouldn't be surprised if the Russian Federation has limited interest in the success of Ukrainian reforms. And I wouldn't be surprised if part of the Russian hybrid aggression ongoing against Ukraine is about undermining those reforms. So yes, I fully understand and frankly share some of the frustrations that you talk about, but I really think it's important that we have a long-term view, that we remain committed to our partnership with Ukraine for the long term.
Do you coordinate your efforts in supporting Ukrainian reforms with some other embassies? For example, there is G7 ambassadors, a formal group of reform support. Do you participate in such kind of a format, formal or informal, or both?
We have lots of partnerships with countries. So on different areas, we work with different countries on different issues. So for instance, we work very closely with our German colleagues on decentralization and local self-governance reform. We work very closely with the European Union and the Council of Europe on media reform. and the list goes on. So almost any issue you look at, we almost always work in partnership with different countries, and this is very important for us. It's an important principle of two reasons. First of all, because Sweden is a small country, and so it's important for us to combine our efforts with other countries to have more effect.
Do you have friends in other embassies, like a real friend with whom you would like to have a drink in a loggerhead?
Alliances, lots of partnerships with other countries, and those, as I mentioned, in different areas we work very closely with different countries. But on top of that, as in any other profession, I do think it is very important also in my job to have that personal connection with colleagues that one works together with well, because obviously if you have that then it's much easier to quickly do things and to do things effectively. So yes, that is important.
Yes, human relations goes first and diplomatic relations goes after it, right?
I'm not going to put one after the other. I'll just say that both are very important, yes.
Let's probably slightly move to another topic, which is very interesting for Ukrainians, which is the business of Sweden in Ukraine. The Ukrainian market has been recently entered by IKEA, and this is a great quality for us all. So my question is the IKEA entry sort of manifestation for the other investors from Sweden that Ukrainian investment climate is already fine, that there is nothing dangerous here?
Yeah.
I think you and I both know the answer to that question. The investment climate in Ukraine still has serious problems. Let's not pretend anything else. But I do think, as you suggested, that the entry of IKEA into the Ukrainian market is an important event, because everyone knows that IKEA is a company which pays no bribes and which does not engage in corruption. So the fact that IKEA managed to establish itself in Ukraine, I think is an important signal, and it's an important sign. Having said that, it took them about 15 years. So I think the fact that it took IKEA 15 years to set up here, and I mean, I'm not saying that all of that was because of corruption, but I do think that it does say something about the remaining challenges when it comes to improving the investment climate here in Ukraine. And I frankly think that is so important, and the reason is that the potential of Ukraine is simply phenomenal economically. The level of education, the human capital, the entrepreneurship, the ingenuity, the creativity in Ukraine is phenomenal. I know so many Swedish investors who might not represent big multinational companies like IKEA, but who have set up startups here in Ukraine and who are so incredibly enthusiastic about their business here. They're so happy about being in Ukraine, about doing business in Ukraine, because they're so successful. And over again, I hear the same story. We could never find the quality of people in Sweden that we find in Ukraine. So it's not just a question of, wages are lower and that's good, because frankly, in some sectors, wages aren't that low anymore. When you look at the IT sector, it's kind of becoming pretty expensive to hire Ukrainian programmers, but it's simply the quality of the human capital is so high in Ukraine. And another factor, I think, which is extremely important, is that Ukraine is right in the middle of Europe, which is very important, I think, if you're a business, especially in these COVID days when in 2020 we've seen how vulnerable global value chains are. Here's a country which has huge industrial potential, huge human capital, high levels of education, great natural resources, good communications, perfectly located in the middle of Europe. And I think, that is something which should really be on the top of the political agenda to sort of unleash that potential, because I think it's huge.
Have you heard about governmental initiative DIIA CITY?
Of course.
About a special regime of a low taxation here. Yes. What do you think about it? Will it make it more comfortable for Swedish business to work here in Ukraine?
Look, I think that the big efforts that the Ukrainian government is making in the area of digitalization is very important. And I think that Deputy Prime Minister Fyodorov is doing a phenomenal job when it comes to using technology and digitization as a boost for the Ukrainian economy, Ukrainian business. So I really wish him all the best of luck. But having said that, I don't think that that can replace the fundamental importance of a functioning legal system. And to be frank, I think that is the number one thing. It's more important than infrastructure, it's more important than digitization, it's more important than so many things, is this idea of establishing a legal system where investors feel that they can have their legal problems addressed in a fair and efficient way, and they don't have to worry about the fairness and the efficiency of the process. I think that is really fundamental.
Switching to another topic, coronavirus, the most hated maybe topic. Sweden had its own way in combating coronavirus. What about vaccination? Will Sweden pursue its own way again, or what is the situation with the vaccination now?
So the situation right now, we have a 4-tier system where the first vaccinations will be provided to the most vulnerable. Then in the next batch come other elderly citizens and healthcare workers, and then in a final phase, the vaccination is extended to the general public. The ambition of the Swedish government is that by June the whole country will be vaccinated, although due, among other things, to the hiccups in delivery of vaccines, which we all know about in Europe. I think that deadline might be put off somewhat, but it's still the goal that by this summer, hopefully, most Swedes will have had their vaccination.
Have you already been vaccinated?
No, I'm not in one of the priority categories.
So diplomats working in different geographical zones, so they are not in a priority. It's not something bad or good. It's just really very interesting. No. So it's not a group of the risk.
I think one reason for the Swedish model, which is based quite strictly on prioritizing the most vulnerable, is that in previous instances of epidemics, we have experimented with trying to categorize different professions and give one priority of another. I don't think diplomats would ever be in a priority category, but that is a model in principle which we've tried in the past, and our experience has been that it has ended up actually delaying the rollout because it is proven to be quite cumbersome to sort of administer it, and when the more complex you make the system, the longer time it takes. And since right now speed is the number one priority, I think the approach that Sweden is taking now is to focus squarely on the most vulnerable groups and then try to spread it out as fast as you can without trying to make it too complicated.
There is a world happiness rating, and Sweden enjoys the 7th place, which is top 10, and Ukraine is 123rd. What's the secret of Swedish happiness, and how do we get closer to you?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know. So a Ukrainian friend of mine once told me that a Ukrainian is never really happy unless they're truly miserable.
That's funny.
And I thought that was pretty funny. I don't think, of course, that it's true, but I think it maybe does. What I think it does capture is that I think it's really, really difficult to rank things like happiness, because happiness means so many different things. The word happiness has different connotations in different languages. In one language, it might be a word where everyone's like, yeah, I guess I'm happy. Yeah, okay, say that I'm happy for your survey. And in another, you know, language environment, the word happiness might connote something much stronger, much deeper, much more rare, and which, you know, fewer people would be willing to apply to themselves just like that. And I think those kinds of differences can have as much impact on a ranking of this kind as anything else. So, you know, to be very frank, I wouldn't attach too much importance to these rankings. Number one. Number two, I don't know. Are Swedes that happy? Maybe. I don't know. When I look at my friends, they seem pretty stressed out. They seem happy enough, but I don't get the impression that they're happier than anyone else. I don't think that we have so much to teach anyone else about happiness.
Ukrainians consider Sweden as a great destination for tourism, and personally I managed to visit Sweden as the last destination before the lockdown. However, we all consider Sweden as quite costly and expensive country. Prove us that we are wrong.
You're not wrong. I can't disprove you. It's a expensive country. Sorry, excuse my language. No, it's really, really, really crazy expensive, and it annoys Swedes as much as it annoys anyone else. Yeah. So unfortunately,
So no chances there again, Polina. I'm sorry.
I could never afford to be a tourist in Sweden. Frankly, when I'm in Stockholm and I see sort of foreigners, I'm thinking, you know, because when you're a tourist, you know, you eat out the whole time and you sort of buy things, and I'm like, how can I even afford it? So no, it's really expensive.
Technically, according to exterritorial principle, are we in Sweden? No.
No.
No! Oh, Jesus, that was the closer I was to
No,
Sweden.
I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know about that stuff, but I asked somebody once, is it true that when you're in an embassy, you're on another country's territory? The answer was very clearly no, we're in Ukraine.
They say that Sweden has a secret recipe of how to win Eurovision. It's not gonna work this year, because have you heard the Ukrainian song "Shum"? That's gonna just noise. It's called noise.
Yeah, I understand.
That it's just gonna blow our minds and the minds of all the Europeans. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Is there a place for Ukrainian music in your playlist?
Okay. I'm going to make a confession. I have a playlist called Gopnik.
Have you been to Tryeshina?
I have, but and on this playlist I have both Ukrainian and Russian songs. Now, most of my Ukrainian friends, when they hear these songs, they say, look, that's not Gopnik music. But there are some fantastic songs on that list. I can share it with you.
Good. Name something.
Alona.
So there's I'm bad at I have to pull it up to sort of to say the names right. There's this one called like a song called Żinocza Sila, which is on there. Do you know it?
No, unfortunately.
What should the viewers of Kyiv Not Kyiv keep in mind after they see the interview with the ambassador of Sweden to Ukraine?
So I think to foreigners and to Swedes, I would say as soon as this pandemic is over, come visit Ukraine, because it really is an absolutely marvelous country. It's right in the middle of Europe, and still I think very many Swedes have not been here. They don't know how much this country has to offer, And I think Ukraine is a country which never stops surprising in the best possible way. So I think that would be my message to any foreigners who might be watching this, especially to Swedes.
Oh, a great one.
Thank you very much. Okay, guys, thank you for watching us today. These were Polina Бойчук and Tetiana Hajduk.
And our incredible guest, but technically we're the guests of an incredible man, His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador of Sweden to Ukraine, Tobias Thyberg. Thank you very much for being an amazing host.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
From Kyiv with love.